So as mentioned, I work with 9. When the program started, it was 10 councils in Western Sydney. And where we started when we first developed our regional waste strategy was looking at litter, because when we went out and sat down with every council, we asked about litter, and the consistent feedback we got was it's one of those issues that falls between the cracks of the various departments of council. So depending on who you ask at council, we don't have a litter problem or we've got a very serious litter problem. So we started looking into it a little bit more. What we found was that in most councils it was managed by multiple departments, and as you can see up there, it was on average litter was managed in some way, shape or form by 5 various departments of council, getting as high as 8 in one of my councils. So what we did was we did a little bit more research around how the litter problem exists in councils and what councils are doing to address it. And one of the big areas councils were interested in learning a bit more about was how much is this litter problem costing me? We know that it's being managed by various departments. We don't know exactly how much it costs. We might know a little bit here or there, but how do we look at it a little bit closer? So in sitting down with all the councils, we looked at all of the various contributing programs, management, cleaning, all the different activities that were happening. And what we found was we came up with a figure of $14 million it was costing the 10 councils in Western Sydney just to address litter on the current activities that they're doing, which works out to be on average around $1.6 million per council. It also worked out that on average councils had 12 full-time equivalent staff working on various litter components, and less than 1% was spent on litter prevention and education. We also managed to work out that on average it was $27 per household of the council rates that were going towards litter programs and litter management. So by having all of these numbers, that gave us a really good platform to start a discussion with the politicians and with senior management of council to get litter back on the agenda with the decision makers and with people who help promote and develop the work plans for councils. So having a very big number like 14 million, you can imagine that grabbed a few headlines and it turned a few heads. So having some politicians, particularly an organisation like Wesrock, we have a board, we have 20 councillors on that board, made up from councillors from the various councils, who started to get information not just from their own councils but from the regional body as well, and started asking a lot more questions around what we're doing with litter. So as a result of that, we had enough buy-in to look at doing some regional programs on the litter front, and we were fortunate enough to get councils to agree to put in a grant to address roadside litter. We started by sitting down with all of the councils and having some discussions with councillors and senior managers around what kind of programs would work regionally. And what we came up with was that we wanted to do something different. We don't want to do what we're already doing on a regional basis multiplied by 10. We want to do something that we can't do ourselves. And so looking at roadside litter was one area that infuriated everybody, but was a little bit hard to do, or hard to do alone, hard to do in isolation. We wrote all of this up into a regional litter plan, and we were fortunate enough to get I didn't actually put these slides together, so that's a surprise. Yeah, thanks, Guada. We were fortunate enough to get $160,000 towards developing these plans and regional projects as well, which gave us a really good starting point to actually address this issue and look at how we can work on a regional basis. So, focusing on roads, that was always going to be a challenge. We were very fortunate to be able to develop some partnerships to get this issue addressed at a strategic level. So anybody who works in local government will know that working with RMS is very, very challenging, and having lots of different councils jumping up and down and saying we want to do something about litter wasn't working. So we were able to develop a partnership approach on behalf of 10 councils, so representing a significant portion of Sydney, to work together to try and get some on-the-ground action looking at litter on those main roads, because we know council have responsibility for their own roads. We've got a bit of a gap where RMS have jurisdiction over major roads or arterial roads, and litter just isn't a priority. It's not something that has been looked at, but is starting to become more and more apparent, particularly through the work that EPA is doing. So we sat down with the councils, with RMS, with EPA, and we started to develop some internal working relationships with various departments of those organisations to be able to deliver a roadside litter project. So what we came up with was a multi-pronged approach project. I'm not going to talk too much about the project itself because most of you have delivered litter projects. You know that there are different components that are delivered. The main things to think about in our project was because we were looking at major roads, we were looking at doing large-scale advertising and using our collective weight to make it affordable to do on a regional basis. The example there is the M4 motorway. That's what it looks like every afternoon. In Western Sydney, peak hour starts at 2:45 and finishes at about 7:30 at night. So by able to getting some really highly visible information out there, we were reaching a really wide audience, and we did all of our advertising and messaging focusing on roadside users. So bus backs, we were looking at shopping centre advertising, and our advertising wasn't in the shopping centre. It was when you went down the escalators out to the car park, and it was the last thing you saw before you got in your car. So all of our messaging was tailored to road users and really trying to get the message out to people when they were in their car or about to get in their car. We had a very large media campaign that went with that was driven by Wesrock and the councils themselves to try and get it into the local media. We have the EPA program happening at the same time, so there was a lot of overarching media, but what we were trying to do was use the avenues that we as local councils can use so that message is supported on a number of levels. We did a number of roadside litter checks, which I'll talk about shortly, but we also had all of our councils out there doing the enforcement component at the same time to reinforce that message. This is the Mayor of Blacktown, who's also the President of Wesrock. By using these political figures, we were able to get a lot of media attention. So by having drawn in the senior managers, by drawing in the political figures, that helped us get our message out further. So much so that a lot of them have the EPA report link saved on their phones now and are out there becoming reporters as well. Roadside litter checks. Now, I know we all have to use local litter checks. It's very hard to do. How do you do that on Old Windsor Road or the Great Western Highway? There's certainly no bins around. You can't knock on the car door or the window and say, hey, what were you planning to do with your litter? So this is where the partnership approach became very, very important. So around this table here, we have an auditing company, we have Wesrock representing councils, we have RMS, and we have two of RMS's contractors as well who are out there doing the work on the ground, cleaning up, looking after the roads and undertaking all of the maintenance activities as well. So we had a chat about how can we actually do roadside litter checks? How do we assess how much litter there is? How do we measure it? And how do we monitor it to work out the success of our program? The map on the right-hand side there is all of the sites that we're looking at. So as I mentioned, main arterial roads that are managed by RMS that fall within council sites that have been nominated by both council and RMS and the litter data to be hotspots. That's where we targeted. And so we had to come up with a new approach. So what we've been working on is a new roadside litter methodology. We've been working with RMS and the EPA to develop a variation of the local litter check that works more appropriate for roadside locations and for roadside litter projects. Rob Kerno, the litter expert, has been giving us some professional advice on that, tailoring it, working with us as we trial the various sites and the various activities that come as part of our project to continue to refine it so we can get some decent data. What that has involved so far is doing multiple baseline projections, looking at litter accumulation rates, and some variations for community surveying and monitoring to get that information that you can't actually do in a local litter check when you go and speak to the community, because our community you can't access when they're driving 80 kilometres, 100 kilometres an hour in these sites. We've had to consider things like safety aspects. So RMS is very, very big on safety. The main reason they don't do litter activities is because it's unsafe. A very big priority for them is looking at how we can do these activities, get in, get out, do it within their existing maintenance operations. So we've had to incorporate safety considerations into the way we do litter assessments. We've also had to look at other types of infrastructure that aren't necessarily considered under regular litter checks. Things like street lighting. how much visibility is there around, guardrails, other types of particular roadside or site-specific infrastructure that can become a barrier or a precursor for people choosing to litter in those locations. One of the great things that came out of this process was as we got further and further along developing this methodology, RMS put their hands up and said, okay, we're very invested in this program now, we would like to roll that out within our own staff. So we've been able to deliver the training to RMS staff as well, which is going to ensure that now they're also collecting the data in a lot of their future maintenance works that goes forward. So the basis for this program then can be monitored and managed on a longer term basis, because RMS now is at a point where they've decided to start keeping a longer term data set, which will give us a lot more information. While this project may wrap up and finish, there'll be other projects that come and go, and RMS have made that commitment to monitor litter and the litter data in the longer term. So by incorporating the training into this process as well, we've been able to get them to not just sign up to the partnership, but to continue to make those commitments going forward. One of the very successful parts of our program that's a little bit different is a lot of the Facebook advertising that we have done that's been very tailored and very localised for our communities. So we've got our standard posts up there, many of which were targeted through selective Facebook advertising mechanisms, where messages that were specific to a particular community, so say for example the Blue Mountains, were sponsored in those particular regions, and choosing selective marketing approaches based on what users we believe were more likely to report use the EPA portal to report litterers. So for example, a whole bunch of the posts went out to people who expressed an interest in something that was environmental, sustainable, waste related, or were already doing activities along those lines. So you can target different groups like sustainability professionals. You can go through, you can tick the boxes of who you would like to target that message at, which helps keep the costs low as well. So for us, we had a very limited budget on this. You can choose to advertise to Western Sydney and it might cost you $1,000, but you can then go through and refine it further to target people who you think might be more likely to take up that message, more likely to help report littering, and then that allows you to have a better success rate with the money and the spend that you do put towards the program. Very interestingly, if you can see that middle graph up there, the most successful take-up of that program was women 55 to 64, which was a little bit of a surprise for us, but generally we had very good take-up across all age categories, but that gives us further information to further tailor more information that's going out there and control the amount of money that's spent. We had very interesting take-up with people taking the EPA's message, tailoring it to their own friends and their own types of litter, many different types of comments coming through, many requesting further information, which was fantastic, and a very high click-through rate to go through to the EPA app. And the great thing about the Facebook advertising is that you get all of that data, all of that information, which gives you that instant monitoring and feedback to be able to evaluate what you're doing in terms of that advertising. That's it.